to welcome everybody again. Especially want to welcome our two presenters today, Grant Gooding and Katie Lord from Proof Positioning. As they'll show you, Proof Positioning is a firm that works with nonprofits and for-profit organizations in a lot of ways, thinking about how better to communicate and message with your stakeholders. Grant and Katie both have been in our field for quite a while. They're very engaging. We had them last year and really excited to have them back. Just as ground rules, so you know, just throw any questions you have into the chat and we'll make sure to get those questions to Katie and Grant. If you have any sort of burning questions that are about you didn't understand something, it's about clarification, go ahead and throw that in as a clarification and we'll make sure to get that clarified right away. We asked them to speak for maybe 35, 40 minutes, and then we're going to have a good 20 minutes for discussion, and we'll end right on time by 9:30. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie and Grant.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And we are so excited to be here with Brent and the whole team from the Midwest Center. I could not have said it better, Brent, when you said, if you have burning questions, because I'm like, at Proof, we help answer burning questions. So it was like, you know, it was just well played, sir. So good morning, everyone. We're so excited to have you joining us on how to craft donor messages that your donors will invest in and will help move your organization forward in the ways that you're hoping to measure over this next year. So real quick about me, and then I'm going to turn it over to Grant to kind of take you through what we're doing this morning. But I am a grad of KU, so Rock Chalk, hope there are people there. And for those of you who know me and some of you that don't, I am a nonprofit nerd, so I live and breathe this. I absolutely love the Midwest Center because there's so many great programs that come and a lot of great research that comes out of the center. So I'm definitely always reading that. And, you know, what I think is so interesting is how neuroscience and psychology and things are really helping us to connect with our donors on a deeper level and are helping us to think about how we can kind of create those donor experiences and those donor journeys we all want to, but at a scalable level. So I'm super passionate about that, and also about how earned revenue is coming in and changing our sector. And so that's just a little bit about me, and I'll be chatting a little bit later, but I'm going to kind of turn it over to our resident nerd, if you will, and he will own that title here in a little bit. But I'm going to turn it over to Grant to kind of share with you a little bit about his background and get us started with a fun game. So I hope you all have had your coffee.
Thank you, Katie, very much for that unofficial yet accurate title. And Brent, thank you. Excited for your leadership over there. So it's good to see you, bud. Nobody cares about me, but someone said you got to have something like this on there. I was a music undergrad, so what I'm doing, I don't know. I was not wildly good at it, but good enough, I think. And moved into the world of research. Went JD MBA route. Did not like law. Became a merger and acquisitions analyst, and started creating some analysis tools that we use. That we use here at Proof. And today what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you all a few tips and tricks about how the brain operates and how we can use some of that to our advantage. And then Katie's going to go through and talk about some real life examples. She gets mail. Nonprofits, y'all like your mail. And so she gets it's kind of funny to see her. There should be a whole thing, just like Katie's reaction to nonprofit mail, and they didn't say this right, or they did say that right, and this, and she hates this. So she's going to go through a few of those examples to give everyone a little bit of like apples to apples kind of examples of how to put some of this into practice. Can you next slide me, Katie? Or I don't have navigation. All right, game. Everyone cool? So I don't know if you have the ability. This is Zoom, and depending on how many folks you got in here, this is possible or not possible. But if you are in a quiet place, I'd like you to take yourself off mute if we have the ability to do that. But please make sure you're in a quiet place, because with 100 people, it's going to be kind of a nightmare. So I'm going to ask you to say one word. Okay, so I'm going to give you an idea. In this instance, I'm giving you the idea of online search, and I'm going to give you a whole bunch of these. And I want you to not clear your mind and not think about it too much, and just give me what organization you think I'm talking about. We understand? Yes.
Yes.
All right. So when I say the word online search, the company I'm talking about is
Google.
and all 100 of you pass. Fantastic. Okay. If I say expensive coffee, I'm talking about
Starbucks.
all right. Greeting cards, I'm talking about
Walmart.
big burrito is
Chipotle.
awesome. All right. So far 100%. Keep going. I'm talking about low prices. I mean,
Walmart.
right? It's like a choir. Hey, maybe my music background is coming in. Maybe my music background is important here. Online auction. Who am I talking about?
eBay.
All right. And then expensive watch.
Rolex.
And then online books.
Amazon.
Kind of a weird one, right? I haven't ordered a book at Amazon in a long time, but we also said it. All right. Next one. Soft drink.
Pepsi. Coke.
Heard it. Somebody is of the same ilk as my wife. Yes. Jeans. I'm talking about.
Levi's.
Affordable airline is
Southwest.
fried chicken.
Kentucky Fried Chicken.
KFC.
Go chicken go.
Yes.
All right.
Sprouts.
All right. Everybody take yourself off mute. I want to point out a couple things. All right. So, go back one, Katie, would you?
Yep.
All right. So I want to point out something. All right. So the reason I gave you this test wasn't to see how smart you are or identify your associations with these situations, but two things did happen that were pretty interesting, right? So for the most part, everybody gave the same answer. Well, why is that? It's because there's something that's hardwired in your brain, an association based on memories and categorical definitions. Your brain is trained to understand categories. Your brain is really garbage at remembering creative taglines, for instance, but really, really good at remembering categories. And that's something we'll talk about here in a second. What's interesting is if you can own, right? Part of our goal as a nonprofit is to own a specific idea inside the mind. That is the battleground, to be certain. And if you can do that, it's kind of like cheating. To give you an example, Southwest Airlines, even though for the most part everyone said that, has not been the most affordable airline for well over a decade. So why'd you say it? When you think about it, you're like, well, actually, that's not true. Maybe it's Spirit or maybe it's someone else. But that brand and that idea are ingrained in your brain. Also, does anybody here even own Levi's? I mean, but my gosh, everybody said it instantly. Now, when I said fried chicken, everyone said their answer of KFC typically, right? With maybe a few exceptions. But and then someone said, go chicken go. Now, what was different about that answer? The reason that we heard it was because it was later. So, and the reason is because that was not the original idea that popped into that person's head, whoever said that. And they might convince themselves it was, but the fact of the matter is it was not. And that is, and the reason that we were all able to hear it is because it happened later. So timing is a very important thing when it comes to understanding how the mind works. We're going to talk about that as well. So test over. Thanks for hanging. Let's talk about some neuroscience stuff, right? I can't see anyone's faces, but I assume everyone is like wildly stoked. Anytime someone says neuroscience, we're all totally in, right? I know it's early, but I will make this palatable, I assure you. So when we're talking about how the brain naturally works, I want to point out just a few things. One is the next slide, and talking about a file cabinet. Now, if you are under the age of 30, this message is for you. A file cabinet is a big metal box. And inside that metal box are paper and folders, things you may have rarely seen. No, I'm kidding. I can't see if anybody's laughing. I hate doing these. So, but your brain operates almost identical to how a file cabinet operates. Okay, so if and this is a contest, whoever answers this correctly, you can pull yourself off mute. Don't do it now, but pull it off if you have the right answer. When you open a file cabinet, where do your eyes immediately go? Answer.
Tabs.
All right, whoever said tabs crushed it. Exactly right. They go to tabs. And the reason for that is because that's navigation. That is how your brain knows what to look for. Now, what types of things are written on tabs? They are things like names, whether they're clients, whether they're donors, addresses, things like bills, employee names. All of those things have one very specific thing in common. This is an important thing to understand. Next, please. The things that are written on file tabs are objective. It is very, very important to understand this. Our 12th grade creative writing professors or teachers would have us believe that subjectivity is the key to success and motivation. However, they would be incorrect. Fact of the matter is, the brain does not like subjective information. Subjective and objective being. Objective means it's the same in everyone's head, right? The idea of bills, the idea of a person's name, the name of an organization, those things are static. They are singular, and everyone knows what I'm talking about. Subjective things are things that are different inside everyone's head, right? So the idea of, say, expensive. Expensive could be different to everyone in the room. Now, if you associate it with something like watch, like we did earlier, it becomes more objective, but that's other nerdy stuff. The takeaway here is objective information the brain remembers. It operates just like those file tabs. And so you'll have like a name, and then inside of a file, you will have subjective information, like your brain will recall whether or not they like that person or not, or what their hair color is, or some type of memory associated with them. But without that objective hook, the brain does not know what to do. So for instance, you wouldn't have a file called favorite clients or favorite donors, because that wouldn't make any sense, and no one else would know what you're talking about. Fair enough? Objectivity. So from it, I'm a bottom line thinker, okay? So when I think about success, that means extracting money from donors to support our mission. Fair enough? Just that. Objectivity, you make a money. Subjectivity, you make a no money. Fair enough? All right, let's roll. That means you, Kitty. Oh. Do you see it? Does everybody see? I don't see anything else. Does everybody see objective versus subjective, or do they see something else? Does everybody still see?
We see a slide.
Try again. Let me see.
There we go.
I can't navigate, by the way. Oh, there we go. All right. Does everybody see a line now?
Yes.
Catching up. Okay, good. All right. This time I want you to use chat. How long does it take for the human brain to make a decision on average? Whoever gets the closest wins a virtual fist bump from me. First person that gets super duper close is going to be the winner. And it looks like that person is Christy Vincent. So full disclosure, I got to make sure you've never seen this or hung out with this before. Ann Thompson, also very close. The answer, according to Johns Hopkins, not me, is 200 milliseconds. 200 milliseconds. You'd think we'd be a much more thoughtful species. Well, why is it only 200 milliseconds? Well, it's a very specific reason. The reason it's 200 milliseconds is because the human brain doesn't have a lot of very complex jobs that it needs to do. It's actually the laziest organ in the entire body. One character, we always compare the human brain to water. What is one very important characteristic of water? It always finds the path of least resistance, right? It's one of the most important things about water. The brain is the same thing. The brain absolutely hates to work. So the less you can make the brain work, right? So write this down. the less you can make the brain work, the more money you will make, right? You would think, well, wait a minute, wait. We're supposed to make people think about stuff. Not if you like making money, it's not. You do not want to make the brain work, and I'm gonna explain that in a little bit more detail later. So your brain's real only job is to sort of keep you alive. So a lot of the basic mechanisms that it has are based on survival. Being able to identify threats in particular is one of the most important things that our brain does. So it can identify a threat, and it needs to do that very, very quickly in order for us to be able to react, in order to stay alive. So let's take a look at the next one. Let's talk about this. So the answer is 200 milliseconds. And there is about a 400 millisecond section that we call consideration. Consideration is, here's my initial reaction. Now I'm gonna let the whatever is giving me the input, whether it's an image or a conversation, I'm gonna give you 400 milliseconds in order to challenge my initial visceral reaction. But that's really all you get, y'all. Human beings make a decision in less than 1 second, okay? I really, really wish this was not true. It's not fair. It's not fair because that's not how our modern culture works. We make biased judgments instantly. And it's based on how we were brought up, to be quite frank. So your whole life up to the age of about 12 is what sets all of your emotions, your dispositions, and your biases. So who raised you and the types of values you were taught up to the age of 12 is one of the most significant variables in shaping who you are today. Human beings change very little after that. Your initial message, the first thing that comes out of your mouth, will be absolutely judged. You ever been in an argument where you say something and maybe it wasn't the best thing to say, right? It wasn't the best argument, and the person that you're maybe having an argument with keeps coming back to that one thing, and you're like, ignore that thing, I got something better. But they can't get past it, and the reason is because with that initial concept that comes into the brain is just like that test I showed you earlier, and it sets concrete in our heads. So it's very, very important to make that first impression. Like, so important. I can't put a big enough exclamation point on it. All right, let's talk about emotions, the importance of emotions. So first we need to know about this guy who is actually a neuroscientist. And I know that because he looks exactly like a neuroscientist. His name's Antonio Demacio, and he actually discovered something incredibly important. And that was that the human mind does not make decisions logically. You'd think we would. We're supposed to, doggone it, because we're supposed to have this combination of emotion and logic and reason together. And when those things come together, then we get to make a smart decision. Well, it turns out that the smart part of the brain, which is up here, it's called the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex. That part of the brain physiologically does not even really participate in decision making. Information comes into the amygdala of the brain, which is where all of our emotions are controlled. And then maybe if we screw up, in my opinion, if we screw up and we make people think, which earlier I said, if you're making somebody think, you're losing money. And this is part of the reason why. If you make somebody think, that means information has to travel all the way up here and then up to this part of the brain that's really good at doing math, but is not good at making decisions. So think about this tonight. The part of your brain that you use to make the most significant decisions in your life, where you work, where you live, what car you bought, major life purchases and decisions, is the same part of your brain that you use when you're buying a sandwich. Slightly depressing? It should be. So what does that mean? Emotions. The more that you can appeal to the human emotion without someone's brain having to work mathematically, the better off you are, and the higher probability that you're going to be able to create a viscerally strong emotive response with a potential donor and extracting money from them to support your cause. Fair enough? All right, I will summarize this for you later, so you don't have to memorize them. All right, Katie, thank you. All right, this is the brain. Any questions? No, I was kidding. All right, so you don't have to know any of this. But the two important parts I want to focus on. One is the hypothalamus, which is where a lot, well, I'm not talking much about hypothalamus. I'll talk about the amygdala, okay? This little green dot right here. The amygdala is one of the most significant parts of the brain because it's where all the input is initially and viscerally processed. And the second part I want to point out is the frontal lobe. I spoke about those just two. It's very, very important to understand those. The frontal lobe is the part of the brain. Imagine that is your accountant, okay? The accountant part of the brain is good at looking at the numbers. It's good at breaking down things, but it's terrible at making decisions. How do I know this? All right, imagine you're like going over your budget and you get to the end of it and you kind of go, I think I'm going to take a second look at that. I just didn't feel right. Like what? So here's what happened. The dumb part of your brain, which is the amygdala, says to the smart part of your brain, I don't think you did that right, which it probably did, right? It's its only part of the frontal lobe is to do kind of complex analysis. And the frontal lobe of the brain is like, okay, fine, I'll redo it. It is not in charge, folks. As much as we would love to think that logic and reason plays a significant role in the decision-making in our existence, it does not. It's barely utilized at all. That means if you are making logical, reasonable messages and associations and case studies at your organization, there is a high probability that you are losing money by doing that. Fair enough? So, important thing to understand. A lot of times, and I see nonprofits do this a lot, they talk to the frontal lobe of the brain. Why? Because it sounds smart. But you know what? Sounding smart never made you any money. They use words, integrated, associated, right? They use a bunch of fancy $4 words that you're supposed to use, and you're supposed to, and by the way, nonprofit, and I get to work all kinds of places, but nonprofits are like the worst at making up words. Why do you do it? You do it essentially because you're trying to be empathetic and you understand maybe an underserved audience, and you say, gosh, just can't get past that word. We have to come up with a word that's more sensitive to describing this group of people, because it's not their fault they're homeless. There's a million things that have caused them to be in that position, and it's just not fair to do that. So we need to come up with something that's more sensitive and more accurate, but the human mind does not understand what you're saying. And if people don't know what, and so a lot of times we say a lot of nonprofit messages are like for a tiny little group of people inside of their office. And well, we all know what we're talking about. Yeah, but no one else does, which means who cares? If you guys don't plan on like basically supporting financially the entire organization with the 10 or 20 people that you have in your office, then you're doing it wrong. If your donors don't understand what you're talking about, you are wasting your time and you are wasting their money. So instead, talk to you below the brain. Simple, emotive messages. That is your best case scenario. So, in summary, and then the nerd will shut up. Use objective messages. Things that everyone understands. Subjectivity, the brain doesn't know what to do with. So find that tab. How is it that we're communicating our organization? If you're using things that can be different, the best, the leading, these are some of the worst words that you can use when you're describing your organization, because no one knows what the heck you're talking about. Find objectivity in describing what it is you do. Singular ideas. The brain is the laziest thing of all time. Don't make it complicated. Talk to that amygdala. Do not talk to the frontal lobe of the brain. Make sure we're saying things that are simple and easy to understand. You got 200 milliseconds, folks. All right. You don't have, that 30-second elevator pitch. That's the most garbage advice you can get. No one's going to listen to you drone on 30 seconds. It might as well be an hour. You got 200 milliseconds to say the right thing. That means your facial expressions, what you look like, do you look passionate and engaged? Are you making eye contact? These things are wildly important. So we have to get those things right. Talk about emotions, use memories, use empathy, and avoid using logic. Now, one of the biggest things we get is, but wait a minute, numbers are logic. Numbers can be emotional. Kay's going to talk about that. Numbers can be emotive if you're communicating them in the correct way. And simple. Simple. The more complicated you make your message, your ask, and the description of what it is your organization does, the less money you will make. That is a mathematical certainty, right? So take these 4 things and run them through all of your messages as a filter at your organization. And if one of these things, this is not complicated stuff, folks, right? It's very, very easy to use these 4 steps to help get like a V1 off. What are you saying? What's your ask? How are we communicating objectively our organization? Coolski, if you have questions, throw them in. I'm going to turn it over to Katie to give you some examples of how you can, real messages and how these principles can be applied to those messages.
Okay, thank you, Grant. And I'm going to have him, I'm hearing myself in our little box office right now. Okay, so I'm going to kind of take exactly what Grant's been talking to us about and really apply it to our sector and some real life examples. So full disclosure, as Grant said, I brought in a stack of direct mail pieces and we went through them and I went through them. And so some of these are national organizations and a couple of these are some local organizations. I will not name the organization, but I do want us to really think about how these examples can maybe apply. Now, granted, yes, most of our direct mail pieces are quite long, but what we're going to be talking about here is how we can craft different messages. We're going to talk about the importance of segmentation and personalization, and really look at, again, just a couple of phrases that can really help us or can really hurt us and lose our donors really, really quick. So the first thing I want to talk about is message differentiation. So all of our donors, first and foremost, and I think we all know this, but not everyone is our donor. So not everyone is going to be the person that is going to give to us. And also, our donors are actually, different people. Now, yes, they can fall into different buckets, but that have different messages that resonate, but we are not all the same. So we cannot anymore really have one message that we hope hits absolutely everyone. It's just not going to work anymore. Personalization is super key. I will just tell you right now, the day of Dear Friends is over. So you have to put someone's name and grab their attention right off the bat. So we worked with an organization that was really trying to differentiate their message, and they had donors and they had volunteers, and it's an incredibly volunteer based organization here in Kansas City. And what we found is we were having a hard time converting our volunteers to donors. We were having a great luck, if you will, with our great strategy with our direct mail and our donor outreach. But for the life of us, we could not figure out why were volunteers not giving. And what we found is this: looking at the differentiation between volunteers and donors was that volunteers believed with this organization because they were hands-on doing the work, that they wanted to teach someone to cook. They were breaking the cycle of poverty. And so they were helping teach someone in a long-term systems-based change. That's what volunteers believed. Donors, on the other hand, they just wanted to feed the hungry. They just wanted to offer someone a meal, if you will. And so they were looking at their gift as helping one person to achieve something that could help them for a day. So bifurcating this message was incredibly important because we were not talking to the same person. So what was going to resonate to a volunteer wasn't going to resonate to a donor, and vice versa. So when we sent that one message that was give people a fish, it wasn't resonating with over half of the volunteers. So when you're thinking about your messages, it is going to be important too, as much as you can. And maybe it's as simple as volunteers versus donors, but we are going to really need to be looking at segmentations too, because segmenting our donors increases the probability that we are getting the right message to the right person. And that helps mathematically the chance that they're going to engage with the way that they want to. Segmenting and there we go. Okay, so here are the real world examples. Are we ready? Here we go. So this was a veterans service organizations. We're committed to helping injured veterans achieve their highest ambitions, and your support makes that possible. It's a lot of words. What is a highest ambition? My highest ambition could be different than your highest ambition. What my context is for what someone's highest ambition is completely different because of all of the life experience that Grant talked about earlier. So what we need to be talking about here is we need to break this down even further. So instead of we're helping injured veterans achieve their highest ambitions, we need to say, we're committed to helping injured veterans get jobs. We're committed to helping injured veterans receive government services, whatever that is. But we need to just say it. Highest ambitions is way too subjective. We need to be objective. And your support makes that possible. Support in what way? What are you asking me to do? Support could be me writing a letter to Congress. Support could be asking for a donation. So immediately following what you're saying, you need to tell me exactly what you want me to do. So we're committed to helping injured veterans find employment, and your gift helps a veteran learn resume writing skills. That is something I can understand, I can wrap my mind around, and I can make that connection. It's even better if you name the veteran, but we'll talk about that in another example. Okay, this is an animal shelter. We are one of the best shelters in the country, but it is still a shelter. Do you want me to be happy or sad with this? Because at first I'm like, okay, you're one of the best shelters. That's great. But according to who? One of the best shelters, how was that measured? Who said you were? Was it the ASPCA? Was it a set of veterinarians or a veterinarian organization? Understanding what the best is and not qualifying who the best is leaves a lot of ambiguity. And then you're telling me that you're the best at what you do, but yet you're saying, but we're still a shelter. So how am I supposed to feel? Am I supposed to feel happy that my local shelter is one of the best? Or am I supposed to feel sad because it's still animals? So we need to break this up. If we're going to talk about our us being top of class, we need to qualify what that means in a way that our donors can understand. And if we want to just evoke the kind of emotion of animals and their loneliness or their needs, then we need to separate this completely and not try to put them in the same category. Because again, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel right now, and I don't know what the best is. So this is kind of now I've completely overlooked, and you've lost me right now as far as where is my emotion supposed to be. And again, you've got that 200 milliseconds, so you could have just lost me permanently. Okay, so here is an addiction treatment facility, and they opened their piece with there are 8.3 million children in the US living with an addicted parent. Wow, that's a really big number, 8.3 million. These numbers are okay, but numbers are okay in context. As Grant was talking about, how I would put this number in context is instead of opening with there are 8.3 million children in the US living with an addicted parent, I am immediately going, well, how can I help? 8.3 million, what is my $5, $10, $25, $50 going to do? What we need to do is we need to say, Julie lives with an addicted parent, and there are 8.3 million children like Julie living with an addicted parent. We need to bring it down to a specific individual tell their story, give them a name. I can understand and hear and relate to Julie. I can understand on a one-to-one basis, but we really can't understand a one-to-many. A one-to-many basis is too much. So in starting out or in opening something, we need to make that emotional connection. And I can be emotionally connected to an individual who is going through something, but I can't be emotionally connected to 8.3 million. Now, what's really interesting about numbers too, and what we see is after you've made that emotional connection, if you do use numbers, it actually does help me justify why I made the decision in the first place. So I'm hearing the story about Julie and her struggles of living with an addicted parent, and you ask me to help, and then you're telling me there's 8.3 million people, so I want to help someone like Julie. So that's how that one I would suggest we be trained, but don't start with numbers right away, because immediately when you start with numbers, I am not thinking emotionally anymore. I am thinking logically, and it's really hard to flip that back. A trauma and food service. Now, this was the opening line of one of the trauma and food service organizations here locally. They said, Katie, you can help level the playing field for neighbors like Robert. So right above this, they told a story about Robert, much like I just referenced. And immediately after that, so I was already bought into Robert. And next they just said, Katie, you can help level the playing field for neighbors like Robert. Neighbors is an important word. And so we found in research that actually there's a slight difference between men and women, which we all kind of know, but men more at, and see as a female, looking at the community level, my neighbors as well. So using neighbors was just a really interesting term, which is another reason I really liked this one. And then immediately following this came an ask for a specific amount and how that could help. So as much, we love hearing our own names. It is just ingrained in us. So as much as you can personalize, yes, I know mail merge can be an absolute nightmare, but as much as we can personalize our messages, the better. The more you use my name, the more you reference, I have given this much in the past, or I've supported you for 5 years. The more I feel like you know me and you say my name, the more I'm going to feel like we have a two-way relationship and that I am giving to an organization that really values and sees me. So this was one that I just absolutely loved for multiple reasons. So how can we integrate this into our organizations? Much like what Grant was saying, look back, take our 4 kind of on your outreach. It doesn't just have to be direct mail, although these were pulled from direct mail, but look at your email communications. Look at your social media posts. Are you telling stories? Are you using emotive words? But also, are you using words that I can understand and process on a quick level? There's no such thing as being too basic. I think sometimes we as nonprofit professionals have been taught to, in our storytelling, to use a lot of flowery language. But the more direct and the more we repeat what we need to our donors, the better we're going to be. And the more stories we tell on the emotional level, the more money we're going to raise. And that is a neuroscience and mathematical certainty. So thank you so much. Here's my information. Grant's is Grant. I'll drop into the chat. But if you have, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning.
Right, Katie and Grant, thank you so much for this. And we have a series of questions, and go ahead and throw in other questions also. I am scrolling through, see, Grant screwed up my feed here because we have a million people saying how long it takes to think of.
It's already been answered.
But let's see. So Kat actually had several good questions. Her first, though, was a little specific about letters of intent. So Katie, I think this might be a question for you. What's the best way to craft a message that will pique their interest to where they will invite you to submit a proposal? So this is maybe not a mail solicitation. This is something maybe slightly deeper. How would you craft that letter of intent to a funder?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really good question. So when talking to an institutional funder, we have to remember that funders are still people. And my hope is that, as best practices dictate, that you've had a conversation with this funder and you know where their interests lie. Now, knowing that it is, yes, there needs to be numbers, but you do need to start out with an individual story. Again, you need to link it. They are still a person. And what they are looking for is, how are you being effective, but also how can you communicate what you're doing? So that is where I would say, again, in a proposal with a story or with a letter of intent and what that gift is going to do. Thank you so much for agreeing, or we are writing you about blank. And how, again, talking about Julie or bringing that down, using those. I know a lot of funders are also, speak our, you will, and so we can feel like they're insiders, but don't do that. Don't use insider speak, which is, where we talk about language that might be something that someone who's incredibly knowledgeable about our field would understand, but a layperson would not, because normally there's going to be several other people that are going to be reading this. And so again, really try to strip down to our objective language and tell a story. Do start with that story in a letter of intent too, and then go back down. It's so important to say something, to tell the story of Julie and to grab that right away. So I hope that helps, Kat. And if you want to talk about that more offline, my email's in there, so please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, just to give a shout out to Alex. Alex also asked a somewhat similar question about major donors, and the fact that major donors may have a deeper interest in a particular area and might need to be communicated to differently. But I think you answered that a little bit, Katie, as far as institutional philanthropy. So. Okay, let's move on here to, and we have a lot. So Demacio, can you give an example of a way to create an emotional message for an organization whose work is racial reconciliation? Did you? So Grant, you're on mute.
Oh, let's see. So what would be helpful is some context there. So, what do we mean exactly? You can come off mute. Whoever asked that question, we can see if we can help out.
Yeah. So just basically, an organization, I'm still working on the mission and vision of the organization, but wanting to use the church as a way to unify races, and basically have churches partner with suburban churches partner with inner city churches in order to provide jobs to those in the inner city, and just build relationships that way.
Okay, so let me stop you there. So I heard a few different things, but a lot of times being able to communicate. Remember that exercise I took us through at the beginning, where we're trying to, what I was trying to get you to do is to categorically understand what an organization does. One of the hardest things you can do when you're coming up with how do you communicate the mission of your organization. And part of the tricky part of that is finding uniqueness. Uniqueness is your X factor. It is your secret weapon. So being able to identify something that's different is something that's not, the brain's trained to identify things that are different. Remember, its job really is to identify threats. Well, differentiation is a threat, right? We call it, is that a lion in the weeds reaction? Your brain is really trained to identify those things that are different. So we're always trying to listen for what those things are. So the thing that I heard was actually a how in what you said, and that would be that you're getting inner city churches to collaborate with suburban churches. That seems to me to be somewhat of a unique approach when it comes to racial reconciliation, and could be in there might lie some kind of secret sauce on how you can do that in a very simplistic way, right? You're saying, hey, look, we already have two people that we find a commonality that exists, and that commonality, all we need is that tip of the spear, as it were. And if we can find that commonality, everything else will take care of itself. And the judging is a whole different animal argument, and that might happen naturally. But it would seem to me that if you're coming up with an emotional message, you're trying to get someone to react and to come up with something memorable. So a categorical definition of your organization could be something to the effect of racial reconciliation through commonality via church life, something like that. And that's a way that you'll not only be memorable, right? But you can talk towards a personality. That's all. But there's a lot of emotional messages you can use in that space, and in almost every nonprofit space. So I don't think coming up with the emotional message is necessarily the problem. It's more of why are you memorable? Why are you going to stand out? Which in a very homogenous industry, which is the nonprofit space, it's extremely important to figure that out. Hopefully that's helpful.
Okay. So I did want to see if Carrie Habib had a question. She diligently had her hand up in Zoom here, and if she does, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, well, I was just wanting to, for me, images are more powerful than words because they can communicate a lot of things and engage your brain in a very different way than words do. They don't make you work as hard a lot of the time. So I think it's really important to be very, very deliberate, considerate, and use images that communicate very clearly and make a good partner with the words that you put with those images. That's just what I wanted to say.
Grant, you're on mute there.
Hey, Carrie, if you're looking for an argument, you're not going to get one, because you're right. Actually, images can do a lot more damage than good if they're done incorrectly. So I tried to answer a few in here, and one of them I said, you absolutely have to make sure that your images reflect your organization.
Can I follow on, Grant? So, I agree completely with Carrie that images are really captivating and probably trigger that very quick categorization that we have in our minds. But let's talk the reality of kind of bias that we can have in how we approach the world. I feel like it could be tricky and maybe this is my ethical brain, this is my frontal lobe getting involved maybe, but could we have these situations where, sure, the quick way of getting a response is to use this image that triggers some sort of bias in somebody's mind? Could we, is there a difficult question here? McDonald's could get me, all excited about eating a Big Mac by having a picture of a juicy Big Mac. But, maybe I'll have heart disease if I eat too many Big Macs. And I don't know. That's a bad example, but maybe Katie could.
Well, one of the things to keep in mind when it comes to images is images do not stand on their own. Right? Images are an emotional adjective to an idea. So, for instance, if I forced you and I said your organization is only allowed to use images, someone might say, well, I could probably figure out what that organization does. The problem is that they're also going to associate you with another probably 50 organizations in your city that do the same thing. So while images are important, they are most certainly not the only thing that you should be using to communicate your organization. Human beings buy ideas. So what we're trying to sell is we're trying to sell an idea, and we can use images to our advantage, but it's only a tool.
So we have a question here from Aaron. Is it more effective to send a direct mail that's like a letter, or, for the lack of a better word, a brochure? So I guess that gets to sort of the idea of images. And
well, that's a very tactical question, because there's lots of variables that we don't understand as far as, well, who is this going to? What is the purpose? To answer the question, is direct mail or brochure more effective on its face, is not fair. I can't answer that question. We measure these things independently based on what the organization is and what the audience preference is to be communicated with. So I'm sorry, unfortunately, that's not a question I can answer.
well, maybe here's a question for Katie. In your sort of study where you're looking at volunteers versus donors, so could you give an example of a personalized message geared towards volunteers? So I get that messaging should be diversified, but I'm struggling with how to change the message appeal to volunteers.
Yep, that's a great question. So what we did in that specific example is, with going with the donors, we kept the message as, you are providing, by donating however much, you are providing a child a chance to go through this program. What we did when we were talking to the volunteers, though, is we looked at it and we said, by donating, you are changing the trajectory of Julie's life by offering her the chance to break the cycle. So instead of, we're giving her the opportunity to attend this program and learn some skills, and we are talking about the longer term lasting effects. So within that example, it was really the immediacy of like, okay, you help somebody do something today, to we in the volunteers, we talked more about what that gift, how that would leave a lasting impression on that person's life. And it could be a catalytic moment in breaking the cycle of a root cause issue versus just attending the program. Does that help? Okay, good.
Yes, thank you so much.
I'm sorry.
Brent's internet went down, so he had to bow off. So you guys want to look and see if there's any other questions here.
Sure. That case study had a significant impact on that organization too, just understanding the differences and clarifying the dichotomy, the communication between those donors and those volunteers was a big relief and got them unstuck.
Okay, I think I just saw a question from Lauren. It says, is there a significant difference in messaging between an ask and a report? Yes. In an ask, we're going to be telling the story of the need much more than in a post. So really in the post is when you can use more of the numbers. You still need to finish out the narrative in a post. So a great ask is, you're telling a story, you're using emotive languages, but then there's a cliffhanger. Like, are you going to help Julie get clean water or go to school or whatever it is? The post report needs to be, here's what happened to Julie, and here's how our organization helped many different Julies. So you've justified my decision. You're still talking to me. You're still creating that emotional connection. You still need to tell those stories. But this is when, in a post, it's best to reinforce those ideas, but that's when you can give me the numbers, because now I'm going to justify. So like if you look at buying a car, right? I bought the car because I wanted to look cool, or my neighbor bought it and I'm trying to keep up with the Joneses or whatever. That's why I bought my car, right? But when you ask me later, why did I buy that car? It's like, well, I don't know if you saw, it's a 4-star safety rating and it's got a great car seat hookup. So I'm going to justify it afterwards. Same with donors and things we do, right? I am doing something emotionally, but I want to hear about the other people like me who made the same decision. I want to feel like that in-group and that insider, and I want you to now tell me why I made a good decision.
We're pretty easy to find. If anybody has a question, feel free to hit us up. We always happy to help out. And thanks for everybody for attending. Hope we learned something.